Without further ado, the Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to St. Mark. Glory to you, Lord Christ. The apostles gathered around Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. He said to them, "Come away to a deserted place all by yourselves and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a deserted place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they hurried there on foot from all the towns and actually arrived ahead of them. As he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. And when they had crossed over, they came to a land at Gennesaret and moored the boat. When they got out of the boat, people at once recognized him and rushed about the whole region and began to bring the sick on mats and wherever they heard he was. And wherever he went, into villages or cities or farms, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and begged him that they might even touch the fringe of his cloak. And all who touched it were healed. That's the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Christ. So if you would turn briefly, those of you that have the prayer book in front of you, if you would turn briefly to page 350. Page 350. And this is a document that I'm sure all of you have committed to memory, perhaps even in elementary school, maybe part of the confirmation class that you attended as an adolescent, maybe 12 years old, something like that, maybe later. But there they are. These are the 10 pretty strong suggestions. Actually, they're better known as the 10 Commandments. But if you would, turn your attention to number 4. Number 4, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. How you doing with that? You know, as soon as I read the gospel for this morning, I'm reminded again of the context of Mark's gospel, the storm-tossed sea. You'll remember I preached on it several weeks ago, and I've been offering an exercise in breathing that I'm going to offer again this morning. I hope it helps. How many people have had the opportunity, maybe having difficulty falling asleep, that have tried the 478? Couple? How many have been in a doctor's waiting room? Not much else better to do than breathe, maybe 478? How many have really walked on the edge of disaster and tried it while driving? 478, yeah, a couple of 478. This is an exercise that you can try anytime. For me, it works most powerfully as a prelude to meditation. When I get up in the morning and go to my cushion, the first thing that I do is anywhere between 5, usually closer to 10 cycles of 478. And you'll remember the method. We simply bring the breath in through the nose to a count of 4, being aware of the belly expanding, you know, like a balloon behind your belly button, filling up. And hang on to that breath for a count of 7, and then exhaling through the mouth for a count of 8. And just looking at the numbers, 478, the 4 is obviously half as long as the 8, so when you bring the breath in, you have to do it twice as fast. You have to really get that stuff in there. And hang on to it for a count of 7. And then when you're letting it go for 8, you better let it go let it go slowly, or you'll run out. You know, you get to 4 and you're out of breath. So the ratio apparently is what's important. And I offer this exercise not only because it has profound spiritual benefit, but there is significant physiological evidence that this relaxes the central nervous system. It's good for the body, and it's probably good for the soul. So let's get into position. Both feet are on the floor. You should be sitting out on the edge of the pew. The back should be unsupported and erect, straight, shoulders back, jaws square. The posture, one of dignity. You are a child of God. You are a human being, therefore blessed with dignity and love and grace. And so your posture is dignified. And coming first now, setting the intention to calm the storm, inviting the body to relax, becoming now intensely aware of the presence of God, and entering into the temple of silence. And I will offer the count for the first 2 cycles, and you're on your own for the final 3. Again, we're going to do 5 cycles. I will offer the count for the first 2, and then you're on your own for the last 3. So let's get ready and draw the breath in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, in. Now just letting the breath come naturally. And just be conscious of the way that you feel right now, as opposed to the way that you felt before the practice. Do you notice a peace, relaxation, and awareness? Good. Coming back into the room. And I wanted this morning to draw your attention to the 4th commandment, to observe the Sabbath. Jesus, discussing with his disciples the results of their initial mission trip, healing and teaching, being sent out. And he says, you boys have been on the road for a while here, probably boys and girls. You've been on the road for a while. Why don't we take some time to relax, just be together, hang out. And, we see snippets of this throughout the Gospels. Jesus finding time to be alone and to pray, to reconnect and draw on the most important resource, which is the relationship with the Creator, his relationship with God. And so I wanted to talk this morning about the necessity of withdrawal. We've all been traumatized. It's been a terrible year, terrible. And I don't know, what else has happened to you besides the pandemic, but life as we know it has been turned upside down. We're all traumatized. We haven't been shot. We haven't had to go maybe necessarily to the emergency room, but in terms of anxiety, we've all been pushed right to the edge. And the uncertainty with which we've had to live with, which continues. I'm sure you're all aware that masks are probably coming back. The numbers are increasing again. It won't be long before the Bay Area goes back into some kind of a mask mandatory, who knows. But this thing is not going away, and everybody's on edge. And not only just because of the pandemic, but, when you think of the domino effect of the lives that have been affected by what's happened, our world has been completely changed. John asked me this morning, when are we going back to communion? When are we going to go back to church as normal? And I don't think there's an answer to that. I don't know if we'll ever have a common cup in church again. And so we're traumatized by the world. And, it didn't really take the pandemic. The world makes demands on us that are just beyond our control. If you're not living in this culture in a constant state of anxiety, you're just living under a rock. You're just in denial. And I don't mean you have to be glued to the television all the time. This is the nature of life. It's no different 5,000 years ago than it is today. How ingenious of our Creator to weave into the wisdom given to the planet. Take some time away. Take some time away. Find refuge. And when I think about Sabbath, and, I grew up in upstate New York, and on Sunday you couldn't shop. There was no stores open. I remember when 7-Eleven first came around, and not only stores were open from 7 to 11, but now they were 24 hours. And on Sundays you could buy anything you wanted anywhere you wanted. Matter of fact, Sunday was an ideal time to shop. I remember when, there was no sports on Sunday. There was no athletic activity. Now kids are just booked all day Sunday. Parents are on the run, 24/7, just getting their kids from one activity to the other. And, people don't take a day off from work. Are you kidding? A day off from work, it's unheard of. If you're not too busy, you're a heretic. You better get busy. And so when do we take time out? When do we step back? When do we reconnect? When do we recharge? When are the batteries, filled up again? And how do you do that? And right there with don't lie, don't steal, don't cheat, don't covet, don't blah, 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 don't do this, don't do that is remember this. Remember. Because if you don't disconnect, you're just kind of, you're on your own. It's a dangerous place to be. So when I think about Sabbath, I immediately think of the little book that was published in 1951 called Sabbath. And it was written by a rabbi named Abraham Joshua Heschel. Show of hands. How many know the work of Abraham Joshua Heschel? Good. You're going to learn something today. I couldn't find my copy. Over the years, I've purchased dozens, and I've given most of them away. And I purchased one not very long ago, and already it has disappeared from my shelf. It's an important book. I commend it to you, Sabbath, Abraham Joshua Heschel. And because I couldn't find the book, I went up on the internet. Thank you, Jesus, for the internet. And as many curses as it contains also blessings. And I Googled Abraham Joshua Heschel, and I'm glad that I did, and I hope that you are too. And I've known the author, I've known of the author, I've known the book better. I didn't really know that much about the man. I didn't know the story behind the rabbi that actually wrote the book that I have taken so much spiritual nourishment from over the course of my career. Abraham Joshua Heschel was born in 1907 in Warsaw, Poland, the son of an esteemed rabbi who was also the son of an esteemed rabbi who was also the son of an esteemed rabbi that goes back 7 generations. He is born into a rabbinic dynasty in Warsaw, Poland. He proved himself as a very young child to be precocious. And on the occasion of the celebration of the Shabbat on Friday evening, he would stand in the midst of family and take it upon himself to preach. By the time he was an adolescent, he was an accomplished Hasidic scholar. He was recognized in his local community for his intelligence and his piety, and at the very early age of 18, he was sent to the University of Berlin in Germany because that's where anybody who was anything academically went. It was the Mecca for education at that time. So in 1927, Heschel would have been about 20 years old, and here he is in Berlin sitting at the feet of the masters. And the unique thing about Heschel that one picks up right away is that he had his feet in 2 very distinct worlds. One, piety. He was passionate about his relationship to God and the meaning of what it meant to be a Hasidic Jew. On the other, he was a ferocious intellect, ferocious, inhaled Kant, Schopenhauer, all of the great philosophers, which at that time in history were all German. They were all German. And so, he goes to Berlin. And it wasn't very long ago that the wheels started coming off the wagon, huh? Things were cooking in Germany, and everybody knew that it wasn't pretty. It wasn't pretty to be a Jew in Eastern Europe at that time. Some scholars, specifically Hasidic scholars in the United States, specifically at the Jewish Theological Seminary in Cincinnati, got wind of what was happening in Germany. And the president of the seminary at that time in Cincinnati made an effort through the State Department to acquire 4 visas for outstanding Jewish scholars in Europe, one of which was Abraham Joshua Heschel. And he was brought to the United States in 1938, didn't speak a word of English. And he became a scholar at the University of Cincinnati. And no one had ever experienced any combination of the understanding of the richness of the Hasidic tradition and also contemporary philosophy like Heschel had. And he was astounded by what he saw. He was astounded by the laziness of their scholarship in the United States. He said Americans are concerned with making themselves happy. That's all they really care about. He thought the synagogues basically had betrayed their faith. He called them on it. And, he began himself, to have a voice in rabbinic Judaism in the United States. It was a scary voice. Scary voice. So life went on, and he wrote a 2-volume series on the prophets. It was a continuation of his doctoral thesis for the University of Berlin that he completed in the United States. It's an interesting thing about that work, The Prophets. It's still considered among Hasidic scholars and Jewish scholars to be the pinnacle of achievement in terms of the study in the prophets. And what happened as a result of that study is that not only did he study the prophets, he became one. He became one. And if you don't know it, you should know it now, that Abraham Joshua Heschel is probably the most prominent religious thinker of the last century. I mean, right up there with Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis and several other prominent religious scholars. Heschel, head and shoulders. I mean, right up there with Merton Catherine of Siena, Julian of Norwich, a great mystic and a great scholar, James Finley. He combines the best of two very, very powerful and often not very easily combined worlds, and intellect and heart, soul and matter. And so he began, as you might imagine, to address the issues of the day. You know, people were amazed in 1941. He hadn't been in the United States for 11 years. And when you read the book Sabbath, you wouldn't believe that 11 years earlier he didn't know a word of English. Why would he? I mean, he could speak 5 languages, but one of them wasn't English. And when you read Sabbath, it's just such a beautiful prose. I mean, as an English major, I've just read this book, and I think, this guy really knows what he's doing. He's a writer. So, anyway, a couple of things that you should know about Abraham Heschel. Number one, in 1965, all of you remember Bloody Sunday. This is when the Civil Rights Movement, they marched over the Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, and were ridden into by police, gas mask police on horseback. And they started with the clubs and beating and whatever, and it came before the public conscience. And people said, wow, man, I didn't know it was this out of hand. And Martin Luther King, at that point, who was already a good friend of Heschel. And they say that Martin Luther King's copy of Heschel's book, The Prophets, was so underlined and committed to memory that the two men knew each other primarily by lineage. You know, King had come down through a line of Baptist ministers, as Heschel had come down through a line of Eastern European rabbis. And they forged an inseparable friendship that would last for years. Did you know this? I mean, if you look at the pictures from Selma, Alabama, there's Martin Luther King, Andy Young, John Lewis, and the little gray-haired rabbi from New York. You know, it's a very interesting combination. But here was the rabbi that had written about the prophets that was the prophet. The genius of King, it was that he combined the scripture of the Old Testament and the Constitution of the United States. For King, the issue was never black and white. It was human. And that's what it was for Heschel. Martin Luther King would compare the pilgrimage of the Israelites in Egypt under the reign of Pharaoh to the plight of the black African American in the United States. And just as God sent Moses, Martin Luther King was convinced that God had sent him. And so he steeped himself, King. And if you listen to his preaching, he's constantly drawing on the Old Testament narrative of Exodus and the prophets. Constantly. And a prophet is nothing other than a truth teller. Here's the way it is, and saying it to power and suffering the consequences, because nobody wants to be pushed out of their comfort zone by a prophet. Nobody. And this was considered the job of King. And so it was obvious that when King said, what's happening in Alabama shouldn't be happening, and he called on clergy all over the country to come and march. And so when you look at those marches that happened in the Civil Rights Movement in Selma and elsewhere, you'll see King, you'll see a lot of African Americans, and you'll see people wearing these silly things. And you'll see little rabbis. And the most prominent in all the denominations showed up to march. And you know, they told Heschel, they said, listen now, when you go, it's okay, you know, go and all that. But when you go, don't be in the front lines, because they're going to assassinate King for sure. And they'll probably take out a couple of the people that are right there in the front lines, you know, joining hands. They'll probably take out them too. So if you come, make sure that your family knows that you might not come back. And if you go and you're not sure that you'll come back, whatever you do, don't stand in the front. And that's where you'll see Heschel in all the pictures. He's right there up front. And their friendship would last for as long as King lived. And as did Heschel's relationship with the Civil Rights Movement just in general. And he was the one that invited Martin Luther King to come speak at Riverside Church when the clergy of the United States gathered in New York City to produce an objection to the war in Vietnam. He said, what's happening, this is the moral conscience of the country. How can we do this to innocent people? What's going on? Don't we know? And Heschel was a keynote speaker, as was King. And that would happen in a number of different venues over the years and a number of different times. I never knew that. I never knew that. And not only did Heschel stand out against racism and the civil rights movement, the war in Vietnam, certainly what was happening to Jews in Russia at that time, which was just unspeakable. Unspeakable. I mean, you know, and all of that on top of the awareness about the Holocaust and so forth. I mean, here's a guy that was walking the walk. He was talking the talk. And he was, you know, probably the most prominent scholar in New York City at a Protestant theological seminary, Union Theological Seminary, which anybody who was everybody in that venue looked to. It's where the great scholar Raymond Brown, who, you know, I turn to so often for his work on the New Testament and especially John's Gospel. But, you know, again, he goes on and on. This combination of this amazing scholarship, just rigorous academic, with a passionate heart for the care of creation, God's creation. And his voice was consistently that with the prophets. God cares about humanity. God is not an unmoved mover. God is moved by humanity. God is the one who found Moses in the wilderness. I've seen my people suffer, and I'm going to send you to do something about it. What do you think?
What, me? They voted me off the island. I mean, I'm just Moses.
But that's the consistent cry of the prophets. And, you know, Abraham was so intent on the plight of the persecuted. Those that are being stepped on and under the heel of whatever form of yoke of oppression on the planet, that he could not speak out against it, regardless of the heat that he took from everyone, including John Kennedy, who said, don't do this, man. These marches are going to get ugly. We'll send the National Guard, but you're walking right into the jaw. Don't do it. Abraham Heschel, when he got off the airplane in Birmingham, was met by a group of rabbis who said, you know, we have to live with this after you go back home. Don't do this. Don't do this. And if you think the speech that, or the letter that Martin Luther King wrote from the jail in Birmingham is powerful, it's nothing compared to the speech that he gave at Riverside Church about the war in Vietnam. And King took enormous heat for speaking out against Vietnam, because everyone, even on the board of the civil rights movement, said, don't confuse the issue, man. We've got so much on our plate right now, we don't need to be messing with what's happening in Vietnam. But King wouldn't listen. Heschel wouldn't listen. Prophets don't listen to people. They listen to God. So you wonder, you know, I wonder, you know, as I look at his life, and there's a great documentary by a guy named Martin Doblmeier, and you should know this man's work. He created other documentaries, not the least of which were Reinhold Niebuhr, Dorothy Day, Howard Thurman, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I mean, these are fabulous videos that are available free up on the web. These huge figures in our history as human beings, of people who really cared about humanity and what people were doing to themselves and to our planet. So I come to a whole new respect for Abraham Heschel, really a whole new respect. And, you know, in studying his life and in studying his work, it stems from, you know, a very simple piety and a very simple observance every week of the Sabbath, Shabbat. It starts, you know, it's sundown on Friday night and goes for 24 hours. Who does that? Who does that? No spending money, no fires, no cooking food, no writing. Couldn't work, do his work, writing, thinking, all that. Just stop. Just stop. And, you know, I think his message in 1951 was apropos, but I think it's even more so today because it's wacky. The world is incredible. And, you know, I'm about to depart. I'm 73. What, maybe another 7 or so years if I'm lucky? You know, my time is about up. So here's a couple of quotes from from the book, The Sabbath. I hope you enjoy these. And I say all this only because I know what you're under. I know what you're going through, and it's not easy. But there is an antidote for it. There is an antibiotic for the madness of the world. And it's your connection with God. It's the transcendent experience of love and grace, of God's passionate concern for humanity and who we are and what we do on the planet. The Sabbath, quoting Heschel, the Sabbath is a metaphor for paradise. Need he say more? The Sabbath is a metaphor for paradise and a testimony to God's presence. The meaning of the Sabbath is to celebrate time rather than space. 6 days a week, we live under the tyranny of the things of space. On the Sabbath, we become attuned to holiness and time. It is a day on which we are called upon to share in what is eternal in time, to turn from the results of creation to the mystery of creation, from the world of creation to the creation of the world. The Sabbath day is like a palace in time with a kingdom for all. The Sabbath is not a date. The Sabbath is an atmosphere. The faith of the human is not a way out of this world, but a way of being within and above the world, not to reject, but to surpass civilization. The Sabbath is the day on which we learn the art of surpassing civilization. To set apart one day a week for freedom, a day on which we would not use the instruments which we have been so easily turned into weapons of destruction, a day for being with ourselves, a day of detachment from the secular, a day of independence of external obligations, a day on which we stop worshiping the idols of technical civilization, a day on which we use no money, a day of armistice in the economic struggle with our fellow humans and the forces of nature? Is there any institution that holds out a greater hope for humanity than the Sabbath? It is a day in which we celebrate our we abandon our secular pursuits and reclaim our authentic selves, in which we may partake of a blessedness in which we are what we are, regardless of whether we are learned or not, or whether our career is a success or a failure. It is a day of independence from all social conditions. The Sabbath is a day of harmony and peace, peace between humans and humans, peace within humanity, and peace with all things. All that is divine in the world is brought into union with God. This is Sabbath. This is the true happiness of the universe. Again, I'm almost done. One must be overawed by the marvel of time to be ready to perceive the presence of eternity in a single moment. One must live and act as if the fate of all of time would depend on a single moment. And this speaks to, I think, how the Sabbath makes its way into every day of our lives. The Sabbath, as experienced by human beings, cannot survive in exile, a lonely stranger among days of profanity. It needs the companionship of every other day. Interior liberty depends upon being exempt from domination of things as well as from the domination of people. This is our constant problem. How to live with people and remain free, how to live with things and remain independent. On the Sabbath, it is given to us to share in the holiness that is in the heart of all time. And finally, eternity utters a day, Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath. Keep it holy. Amen.
Contributions to St. Luke's Episcopal Church help to make the digital ministry and other outreach within the community possible. If it is in your heart to make a donation, St. Luke's secure PayPal link, as well as the church's mailing information, may be found in the description of this video. Thank you.